All right, I wanted to make this video for the men and women who are in basically the dating age. I think that sadly the world is kind of morphed into something that's it shouldn't be. What dating is mainly, honestly, it's for young people. It's not for older people. But besides that, I wanted to make this video for the people, particularly women, but for men and women. But I would say for women in the age group of their 20s and men up until about 40. I would say between 35 and 40, kind of pushing it. So I've been noticing more and more people, the younger people, have been saying that they don't want to get married or have children. And this is more for women. Women are saying this more and more. But I would say for men too, to a degree. I think more men tend to be more indifferent than women. But there's definitely this defiance from women, just basically saying that, they're adamant, I don't want to get married, don't want to have children. And that's fine. But the point that I want to make in this video is that life isn't that, clear cut and dry. So just because you feel a certain way today doesn't mean that you're going to feel that way for the rest of your life. And if there's one thing that I've noticed is women tend to be much different from men, where women will say and they'll be adamant about something, and then all of a sudden, and it's usually around 30, and there's a biological reason for that age, age 30. But I've noticed that they'll go from being adamant that they don't want children or get married, and then they'll completely flip. I mean, just completely flip. And I just wanted to kind of, just in an attempt, it's honestly, it's probably a waste of time, but I wanted to give two perspectives. So I'm older, I'm out of that age group, my time has passed. But I just wanted to give my perspective from, it's definitely a very minority perspective, and then I'll give the, the majority perspective. So my perspective is, and when I say I'm in the small minority, I'm talking about, single digits. I don't even know if 5% of the population is in my, in my group. So for me, I've never wanted to have children or get married. The reason why is I've just always, I guess I've always understood human nature pretty well. As I've gotten older, I've learned it more and more. But I've never wanted to, because if there's one thing that I can say is I kind of always understood that not everything is as glamorous as we tend to, just as our human nature, we tend to think things are. We see a person driving a nice car, we automatically think that, oh man, they must be rich and everything's great. And that's just not true. Or you see all these people posting their happy pictures online, and then you think that their lives are all great, and then you find out that they're always fighting in the background, or they're about to get divorced. So one thing that I've kind of always knew is that getting married and having children is a tremendous responsibility, particularly for men. But these two things, I've always told people, there's two particular things in this world that can really cause you problems, and I'm talking about life-changing problems. The number one is health. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. You can have all the money in the world, you can have fame, you can have whatever. If you don't have your health, you're done. So that's one. And then the second one is relationships. And I don't think a lot of people really understand the magnitude of a relationship, particularly when you have a child with that person. Your life changes forever. And I've always looked at marriage that it's I've kind of always just innately knew that it was a bad deal for men. And one thing that always stood out to me was, you would hear these normie jokes about marriage and men, how, just kind of jokes, but, they're obviously true. That, is just happy wife, happy life, all this stuff about, I never found it funny. I would always see these people saying it. I'm like, I don't find that funny. And it's true. So with that, I've always kind of looked at marriage for most men as that it ruins your bargaining ability. And I never wanted to put myself in that position. I never wanted to be in a situation where I willingly put myself in at a disadvantage in a relationship, whether it's even just business or, a personal relationship. So with that, I never saw marriage as a good deal for men. It's always, oh, your freedom is over after you get married. And I used to always hear men talk about how their, girlfriends and then wives completely changed after they got married. And I'm like, that's not cool. It kind of puts you in a bad situation that, you made a commitment to a person based on one thing, and then you find out it's the exact opposite. And I've witnessed it for myself. I see these women, they'll treat their husbands very badly. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, man, I wouldn't tolerate that. But the one problem that a lot of people don't realize is when you get into a marriage, first off, when you get into a marriage without children, it's still very difficult to, separate, because now you've introduced the state into the equation. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's very difficult to get out of those situations. You can't just oh, it's over and I'm out of here. So that's one thing. But then when you have children with that person, it's even much, much more difficult. I mean, that person can make your life miserable seeing your child. They often say, oh, you have to fight to see your children. You shouldn't have to do that. So with that said, I never looked at marriage as a good... Oh, I shouldn't say that. I did when I was younger, when people would tell you, you kind of thought that was normal. But, as I got older, I realized that, it's a bad deal. And I kind of learned that somewhat at a very young age. So with that said, I'm almost 49, so my time has passed. And if there's one thing that I can say is, I've never regretted it ever. In fact, I would say as I've gotten older, things are, my belief in that has gotten even stronger. I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm so glad, just with the way that the world is going and things like that. I think it's irresponsible to bring children into a world that's getting worse, but that's just my personal opinion. So I know that mentality is not the majority. So when I give you my perspective, I can talk to some of that small minority of people, but this is just kind of an example of there are people out there that believe this, and when they were younger and their mentality didn't change. So that's that example. But then here's the other side of it. I want people to understand that, particularly women, that more often than not, you're gonna have regret. And and the one thing that particularly women, and men, but more so women, they have to understand that in this life, there's a time and a place for many things, and once that time passes, you never get it back. It's gone forever. I always say that, every generation, it's like we're on an assembly line. We obviously start off young, and then we all just kind of move on, and we get old. And I guess I'm actually surprised that more older people don't talk about this, but you have to understand that there's a time and a place for a lot of stuff, like going to college. and unfortunately college is a scam now, but like when I went to college, there was a time and a place to do that. It's basically 18 to 22. Your experience at college is going to be the best when you go at that time. But if you wait and you wait and wait, it's never going to be the same, particularly when you get into your late 20s, 30s. I even remember one time in college, my freshman year, we were in biology class, and there was this guy. He was, so I was 18, and, obviously most of my class was 18, and there was a guy, I think he was like 35, I think he was like mid to late 30s, and we used to call him Dad, and he was at college to change careers. And the point is that his experience was never going to be the same as the people who are 18 to 22. So there's that time and a place, and once it's gone forever. Like, I can't go back to college now and expect to have the same exact type of experience as I did when I was younger. The same is true for getting married and having children. And I focus more on the women in this, because one thing that I would say is most women, I think, just biologically, they want to be in relationships. It's just biological. You can't fight it. Now, are there some women that, aren't wired that way? Absolutely. But it's a very small minority. But I guess the point of this video is I want people to understand that, be prepared that just because you feel a certain way right now doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. And, just take this as somewhat of a warning and just be mindful of it. And I guess to a degree, think about it more and more, because, once that time passes, you're not getting it back. And here's one thing is that, I've heard a lot of women say this. I've never felt this way ever. I hear women that are single, they'll say that, when they come home, they get sad when there's no one at home. They come home to an empty house. I've never ever felt that way. I actually like it. I like my solitude to a large degree. I'm very social, but I do like my alone time. But for me, that's one of those I guess more of those aspects for men, where we don't really necessarily need that type of interaction where women tend to. And then also, when women, as they're getting older, they're when they see other people with children, they start thinking about that they, I wish I want one and all that. I've never done that. I love playing with kids. Kids are very cute, but I'm so happy that I don't have them. It's kind of fun to play with them. Then once I'm done, I get to go home by myself. But women tend to get that, when they're around children, they tend to get that biological need to raise children. Just be, I guess just cognizant of that, because I don't hear a lot of people talk about this. If there's one thing that I'll say is that, the older generations don't give the younger generations, any much good advice. It's definitely, if there's one thing I could say right now, there's definitely more of a red pill community. I got red pilled at around 2007, and then I got really red pilled in 2011 about life in general, where I realized a lot of the stuff that we're told is just lies. But yeah, so understand that having children and getting married is not for everyone. I want people to be aware of, more so men in this regard. There's a lot of men that are married and they absolutely hate it, and they won't admit it. I actually have a one particular friend. He talks about people getting married and stuff like that, but he's miserable at home. He even joked about his wife dying. So yeah, I mean, it's just weird how people just live in this false reality. So So you just also understand that just because people are married, they give this divorce statistic, 50% of marriages end in divorce. Well, just also understand there's another side to that. Just because people are married doesn't mean they're happy. And I would say, sadly, more men are not happy because men in marriages tend to bear the brunt of the bad stuff versus women. And, I'm sure that's going to upset some people. I don't care. But that's just the reality of it. So, I can give you an example of it. The demographic that goes to, gentlemen's clubs are overwhelmingly married men. And the other group of people, men that are on dating apps, they're kind of overwhelmingly married men. So there's a lot of men that are, just because they're married, they're lonely. They understand that they're lonely. So yeah, that's, if there's one thing that I haven't heard many older people say, is just because you're married doesn't mean that life is happily ever after and everything's great and things like that. So just understand that, and understand that for a man particularly, once you get into a marriage, it can go bad very, very quickly, and it can ruin your life. So I hope this is helpful. Just figured I'd share my perspective. There's people on both sides, but there's more people on the side that I just spoke about that they will regret it if they don't get married. More so women though. All right, I think that's it. Hopefully it's helpful.